Yes, there are many replacement keyboards for the Spectrum, and yes, I've reviewed quite a lot of them. The DK-Tronics keyboard, the Saga, the Stone Chip, the Low Profile, and many others. But they just keep popping up, so let's take a look at another one. Mancomp first started to advertise their keyboard around November 1984, the Mancomp MO184. Apparently designed by programmers and repair specialists for simplicity, speed, safety and space, whatever that means. The price was $54.95, slightly high compared to others at the time. It boasted low-profile keys, large keycaps, bright colours, a numeric pad and a full-size spacebar. It was built in a glossy, easy wipe case that was fully insulated, with room inside for a power supply and interface 1, and of course, more importantly, a pen holder. At the back it was cut out to allow access to the Spectrum's connections. It was reviewed by several magazines at the time. Popular Computing Weekly said that although it was a decent enough keyboard, it was far too large and looked cheap with the flimsy fiberglass look. First models had stickers on the keycaps, but apparently Mancomp were looking into direct printed versions. The one I have still has stickers, so maybe they never got round to it. Sinclair User said it was nothing special, and the cheap underside made it easy to break the clips that held the motherboard in place. Xenix Computing also had issues with broken clips and the overall quality. Apparently they fitted it all together on a Tuesday, and by Thursday some of the keys had fallen off, and by Friday the Spectrum had died. Not a glowing review then. By July 1985 the market had slowed down, and replacement keyboards seemed to be going out of fashion, probably due to the 48K Plus being released. And you could buy the Mancomp at this time for £35. But the marketing machine had gone mad by now, and now they were claiming that it was designed in conjunction with educational psychologists. What? Despite this, it's time to test it out though. Yes, it does look rather sleek and attractive in the adverts, and it wasn't until 40 years later, when I got one, that I realised it had a design flaw, well, at least one anyway, and I can't believe I didn't see it in the adverts at the time. Can you spot it? Well, maybe this will help. Here is the Mancomp keyboard. Okay, yes, the top casing has a large cutout hole to hold a power supply, and it looks ugly, and half built. I will put a power supply in, but only for completeness though, and I won't be using it to power the Spectrum. The case itself is very large, as the reviews mentioned, especially compared to others. It looks oversized. It is very shiny, but not as flimsy as I had expected reading the reviews. Lifting the top off, and we get a nasty green lower section, with a space to hold the Spectrum's motherboard, and the clips are still intact. The lower case is very brittle though, and mine has already had a piece snapped off. Looking at the moulding, it seems that the bottom part of the case locks into position using the clips. However, they don't quite fit right. And because the actual motherboard is locked in place by the top case screws on the original, it's left to float about loose. However, all of this was an error on my part. I thought that having the motherboard this way would block access to the ports, and could not see how it all lined up. And I would probably have to use an extender cable. Then, well, can you spot my mistake? Yes, it's supposed to go the other way around. Those clips are supposed to go in the holes at the side. Oh dear, I must have been having a long day. Anyway, once that was sorted out, the motherboard and lower part of the original case was more or less firmly held secure with those clips, and it did give access to the ports at the back. So now it was time to test it out. To try and keep the aesthetic, I put in the power supply as mentioned previously, and it does look a lot better with that in place. In use, the keys feel tactile, nice clicks and good feedback. Like any old keyboard though, some keys can fail to detect if you hit them at the wrong angle, but this is over 40 years old, and that only happened a few times in over an hour. There are separate keys for useful things like the cursor keys and brake, although the cursor keys do not work in BASIC, they just pick up the numbers, and you still have to hold down the shift key to get the cursor movement. Obviously keyboards like this are best suited to typing, So loading up Taskword and we get a nice experience. With a more solid feel, typing is improved and you know when you've hit a key, unlike the rubber keyed original when sometimes it didn't trigger. Onto some gaming then, Attic Attack, and the keys are responsive, but you would probably need to have some sort of sound amplifier as the noise from the keys is quite loud. Onto a simpler game then, Invaders from Arctic Computing. Just 3 keys here, but all of them work fine. And Hundra, a game which uses 5 keys, and again no issues other than my bad gameplay. Everything felt solid, and I never felt that the keys were not being detected. On to adventure games then, and this is where the keyboard should really shine. Bounty, my adventure game, had no problems whatsoever, and it was really nice to type on that, getting full and proper feedback. Adventure 1, again as you would expect, no problems, other than I wanted to keep playing this game. Whenever I load it up I just want to keep going. You get a sense of solid performance with the keys working well, and that click really does make a difference. Overall then, I think it's an ugly looking thing. Use of cheap plastic meant that the casing was brittle and subject to breaks, but hey, it's wipe clean, although it does attract dust, so not really an improvement. Fitting the motherboard was not straightforward either, but in use it can match most other replacement keyboards. It just needed to be smaller and not have that gaping hole where the power supply fits.
Mission 1, America.
Double Dragon 3, The Rosetta Stone. Released into the arcade in 1990 by Technos, it continues the story of the Lee brothers, the first and second games. In this installment, they go off in search of the Rosetta Stone. It's a horizontal beat-em-up in the classic style. Fight your way to the right, beat all of the villains, and move to the next level. The arcade version had some nice intros with speech, but the official Spectrum release just took you straight to the game. In 2023, a modified version was hacked together to feature music from the Commodore 64, converted to the Spectrum, along with the intro and weapon shop missing from the Spectrum release. I will be reviewing the original, released by Storm in 1991. Now I'm not a fan of beat-em-up games, but obviously people are, so let's dive in and see how this one plays out. The graphics are monochrome and only take up about 60% of the screen. Things scroll smoothly though, and the sprites are masked sufficiently so that they never get lost in the detailed backgrounds. However, you can get lost in a bunch of enemies if they all crowd round you, which they tend to do. In this situation, all you can do is either risk running away and getting a fist in the back of the head, or just mashing the keys in the hope that you might hit some of them. The backgrounds look like the arcade version, but with obviously less colour. As with all beat-em-ups, there are multiple moves such as punches, kicks and jumps that can be done simultaneously to provide things like jumping kicks. It wasn't long before I was surrounded by people, all wanting to beat the hell out of me. Thrashing away at the keys in the hope at some point I may hit them, eventually I did manage to beat some of them. More often than not though, they hit me first. They all need a good few kicks or punches to finally get rid of them. The sound is simplistic sadly, just a white noise effect for everything. After about 1 minute I got bored to be honest. I know the game got good scores in the magazines, but I suspect those reviewing it liked this style of game. Practicing the different moves would improve things, and I managed to get into the weapon shop once. And here you can buy things like extra energy and even new moves. Now I thought the weapon shop wasn't included in this, as I mentioned at the start of this piece, but apparently it's there. Once you beat up enough people, you get to the end of the road, and you can then enter this garage thing to go on to the next level. And this takes you onto something that completely baffled me. A motorbike zips across the screen and just knocks you over. I tried many times to knock him off or do something, but I just couldn't get past this part. Yes, I'm not very good at beat-em-ups, but surely it could have been made a little bit easier. Anyway, watching the RZX to see later levels, the graphics change as you would expect, and the enemy get harder to beat. Later on, enemies even have weapons. One thing that bothers me, and it's the same with many games, not just beat-em-ups, why do the beaten enemies flash and then vanish when you hit them? I know technically it's to save displaying the sprite, etc., but there must be a better way. Maybe just stamp the graphics onto the background and leave them there. I don't know. Overall, the game looks good and plays well. I can see how this got high scores in magazines, and for beat-em-up fans, this would have been great to buy and take home. For me though, it's one game that I won't be playing again. Bearded Fantasy was released in 2025 by Juan Antonio Gigetti. The game is not free, but giving a few euros to keep the author developing is worth it. We start with a nice intro screen and music, where you can change the keys if needed. You only need 3 keys to play, which is left, right and jump. You control a bearded painter, who has to paint a castle. Sounds strange, but hey, this is a Spectrum game after all. The first thing you need to do is grab your paintbrush, which can be located somewhere on screen. Once you have this, any floors that you move over will become painted. The first level introduces you easily without any enemies, and once all floors are painted, the exit appears to the next level. Here we get enemies though, and you can't jump over them. You can use teleports at strategic parts of the screen to move to other areas. When you reach a certain percentage of the room being painted, a power pill will appear, and collecting this will allow you to kill enemies. The graphics are nicely drawn and move smoothly, and the sound effects are simple, but there's some speech at different sections, for example, completing a level. There are only 8 levels to play through, but this is a nice enjoyable game, and well worth playing. Gorf was an early arcade game released in 1981, and seemed to borrow elements from other early games, bringing them together with some speech and additional levels. When I say borrowed, I mean blatantly copied, really. There wasn't a good version of this on the Spectrum until now. Dinisoft released this gem of a game in 2025, and it's extremely close to the arcade game, but sadly missing the speech. Level 1 and we get Invaders, or as this game calls it, Astro Battle. Yes, the game looks like Space Invaders, but here you get one shield instead of multiple bunkers. This level I found to be faster and harder than the arcade, or maybe I just hadn't got used to it yet. Luckily, you can select the number of lives at the start, and I chose 9, which was a very wise decision. Level 2 when we get Laser Attack. Now this reminds me of Softek's Firebirds, but I'm not sure which arcade game it might resemble. Sound is used really well throughout, with multiple effects for various things. Level 3 and Galaxians. Yes, we get swooping Galaxians just like the real version. Level 4, Space Warp. This is a bit like Gyrus. Avoid the meteors and shoot the aliens spinning round. Level 5, the boss battle, called Flagship. This is a sort of cut down End of Phoenix level. You shoot through the force field and hit the flagship a lot of times. The firing for me was a bit problematic, in that if you fire and then fire again straight afterwards, the first shot would vanish, but that's how it is in the arcade version. A fantastic conversion all round then, and highly recommended, especially if you're an early arcade fan. Missing in action games are being found quite often at the moment, and it's great to see them appearing at last. Thanks to Planeta Sinclair for their continued efforts in this. One recent game is Interceptor, that has a long and complicated history, and you can read all about that on the Spectrum Computing forums. The game, though, is a shoot-'em-up in the style of Star Clash from Micromedia. Groups of aliens slowly move down the screen, and you have to shoot them. The graphics are smooth, and sound is well used. It doesn't have the same additions as Star Clash, but it's still a decent game to have a go at. Another game is Run Rabbit Run. This is a Pac-Man style game, swapping the Pac-Man for a rabbit and the power pills to carrots. As an early game, it has character-based movement, but it's better than a lot of other early Pac-Man versions. Another one to add to your Pac-Man list if you're a fan. Keep an eye out for any missing in action games you may come across in your journeys. Who knows what could be hiding in a friend's shed. It's type-in time, and here is Donkey Ape that was published in Personal Computing News from November 1984. It's a long listing with a lot of data statements, and after a lot of typing and sore fingers, I can run it for the first time. And we get a lot of variable not found errors. Looking through the listing, they're not actually set anywhere in the original code, so I had to add them and set them to 0 and hope for the best. Second attempt and the ladders were not lined up properly. Then I noticed the collision detection wasn't working, and you could just walk through the barrels. Digging a bit deeper though, I finally sorted it all out, and we can now play the game for the first time. This, as you would expect, is a version of the arcade game Donkey Kong. And for a type-in, it's not a bad attempt. We get a nice introduction with Kong, and then the first level. Here you jump the barrels and climb the ladders. Yes, it's slow, but this is basic after all. When you reach the top, if you can, you get the same level again, but with more barrels. Control is often sticky, as with any basic game, and sound is simplistic as well. This is really not a bad effort for a type-in, and it's probably the first time it's been seen in over 40 years. You can grab this from my website shortly.